Some nights I still think about it. Not on purpose. It's like the memory creeps in when I'm tired, when the world outside my window is too quiet. It wasn't even the most dramatic thing that's ever happened to me, but it left a mark I don't always know how to explain. I didn't see it coming at first, and now I wonder if I ever really saw the moment everything shifted. I'd had my share of weird nights working at Casey's. Late shifts always drew a strange mix of people. I'd learned how to brush off awkward compliments, bad pickup lines, the usual nonsense that came with the job. But that night, something about Darren stuck with me. I can still picture the way he sat there alone, leaning on the table like he owned the place, like I was supposed to notice him. And I guess I did, but not in the way he probably wanted. When he left, I found his number scrawled on the receipt, messy handwriting, like he didn't care how it looked. And that little smiley face he added. It made my stomach turn in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't cute. It felt like he thought he'd started something, like he expected a reply. I crumpled it up without thinking, tossed it into the trash with the rest of the scraps from his table, but even as I kept wiping down the counter, I kept feeling like his eyes were still on me somehow. It was quiet by then. The kind of quiet that makes you notice the hum of the fridge, the soft buzz of the lights, the faint smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I tried to shake it off, to focus on closing duties, but the weight of that slip of paper stayed heavy in my pocket, even though it wasn't really there. I don't know why that moment felt different from all the others. Maybe it was nothing, but now, looking back, I'm not so sure. When Darren came back that night, something felt off the moment I saw him walk in. It was like he was acting like we'd already started something, like I owed him a conversation I hadn't agreed to. He slid into the booth with this easy smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to turn away, to keep it all business, but I had to keep that polite grin plastered on my face. I was too tired to deal with whatever game he was playing, but I knew I couldn't just ignore him. Then he started talking about his boat, this tiny thing he kept on the lake. It was more than a casual mention. It was an invitation, and I could feel the weight behind it. It wasn't friendly. It was like a trap dressed up in charm, expecting me to smile and say yes because that's what you're supposed to do. I nodded along, told myself to stay polite, to keep it light, but inside I was already trying to plan how to avoid him next time. I kept thinking about how tired I was, how this wasn't what I'd signed up for when I took the job, but I needed the money, so I played along. I wanted to believe he'd leave me alone after this, that this would be the end of it. But somewhere deep down, a quiet part of me knew it wasn't over. That night, after my shift ended and I was locking up, I caught sight of him again. Not inside the diner this time, no. He was standing just beyond the parking lot's edge, near the cracked pavement where the streetlights barely reached. He wasn't with anyone, not moving like he was waiting for a friend or hurrying off somewhere. He was just standing, watching, like he'd claimed that piece of space as his own. At first, I thought maybe he was waiting for a ride or just taking a smoke break, but the way he stood, like he wasn't in any rush, like he was there for me, it hit me harder than I expected. I could feel my chest tighten, this cold wave that I couldn't just shake off. I found myself lingering too long inside, wiping down tables, taking extra time with the dishes, just so I could watch him from the window without him noticing. Every time I'd glance up, there he was, standing still, not moving, almost like he was daring me to leave. The place that had always felt like my safe spot suddenly didn't anymore. I felt trapped in my own workplace, the very spot I counted on to get through long nights. And as much as I wanted to believe he'd get tired and walk away, deep down I knew he wouldn't. The next time Darren walked into the diner, the energy between us was different. There was no warm-up, no awkward attempts at being charming. It was like he'd dropped whatever act he'd been putting on before and was showing me something colder, something sharper underneath. I could feel my heart speeding up, but it wasn't the nervous flutter you get when you hope a bad moment will pass. It was something heavier, a warning I wasn't ready for but couldn't ignore. I kept telling myself maybe he'd just come in for a quick coffee, maybe he'd realize I wasn't interested and leave. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't just looking. It was like he was trying to make a point, to remind me of something I couldn't quite put into words at the time. That kind of look lingers, even when the person who gave it is gone. I found myself holding my breath, counting down the seconds until he left, hoping he wouldn't turn back around or say something that would make the whole place feel smaller and colder. When he finally walked out, I felt like I could breathe again, but only just barely. That night changed the way I saw everything, from the empty booths to the clock ticking down my shift. It made me realize this wasn't just a harmless crush or a bad tip waiting to happen. Something was wrong, and I was stuck in the middle of it. Finding out Darren had gone through one of my coworkers to get my full name was a punch I didn't see coming. It felt like the walls around my privacy just crumbled without warning. I thought I had some control, that I could keep things professional, keep him at a distance. But suddenly, that control was gone. Someone else had given him access. And with it, he'd crossed a boundary I didn't know how to put back in place. Then the text came. It wasn't sweet or joking like I might have expected from someone who wanted to be friendly. It was a sharp reminder that this wasn't over, that blocking him wasn't going to erase what he'd already done. I stared at my phone more times than I care to admit, feeling this sinking dread settle in my stomach. I blocked the number, sure it would help, but it didn't. If anything, it made me more aware of how vulnerable I'd become. After that, I started noticing things. Little signs that maybe he was watching even when I wasn't looking. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, even in broad daylight when I should have felt safe. Every text, every message, every small interaction was like a thread pulling tighter, and I didn't know when it would snap. That feeling of being watched stayed with me, haunting the edges of every day I worked at Casey's. When I saw the envelope tucked under my windshield wiper, my heart sank before I even touched it. There was this heaviness, like I knew exactly what it was before I'd opened it. The cold metal of my car's door handle felt numb beneath my fingers as I pulled it free and slipped into the driver's seat, fingers trembling. The night around me felt too still, like the world was holding its breath along with me. Inside were pictures, and not just any pictures. There were shots of me at work, captured from angles I didn't even know existed. Photos of my apartment, the front porch where I sometimes sat to breathe, and the one that chilled me most of all, a shot taken through my window at night when I thought I was alone and safe. It hit like a punch to the gut, this overwhelming violation of space I'd always called mine. That moment shattered whatever denial I'd been holding on to. It wasn't just a creepy customer or an awkward invitation anymore. It was someone who had been close enough to watch, close enough to wait, close enough to invade every part of my life. I sat there for a long time, staring at those pictures, trying to piece together how long this had been happening behind my back. And I realized then how wrong I'd been to think it was just a joke or a mistake. The phone call from the police felt like a lifeline, like someone finally saw what was happening and said it out loud. But even with their warning to Darren, the fear didn't just vanish, it lingered in the spaces between my breaths, in the way my hands shook when I turned a key in the lock. I quit my job at Casey's that week, packed up what I could, and moved to a new apartment, hoping to erase the traces he'd left behind. But no matter how far I drove, how many times I changed the locks, how many times I told myself I was safe, that shadow stayed with me. Every time I opened the door or walked to my car, I wondered if he was just waiting, just a step behind. I caught myself jumping at sounds in the night, double-checking windows and doors, pretending to be calm but feeling like I was always bracing for something. It's been years now, but I don't think that part of me will ever fully let go. I'm still careful with who I trust, still wary of the people who seem too interested in the details of my life. I don't know if I'll ever stop wondering if he's out there, watching, waiting for a chance to come back. The move helped me reclaim some peace, but some nights, when it's quiet, I still feel the weight of those photos, those texts, that silence, and I wonder if he ever really left at all. There are parts of that trip I try not to think about, mostly the good parts, but one night keeps resurfacing. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet things, the sound of my shoes, a flickering street lamp, the weight of a breath. I told myself it was nothing, but I don't believe that now, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever did. I remember that night clearer than I want to. I'd been wandering the streets for a while, taking in the city, feeling that mix of excitement and fatigue that always hits after a long day somewhere new. The place I chose wasn't anything special, just a narrow little spot tucked between shops, dimly lit, with these worn wooden tables and the faint smell of garlic in the air. I remember feeling good when I first sat down, like I'd found a quiet corner to breathe. But then, almost immediately, I felt it, this heaviness, like someone was watching. There was this guy, maybe a table or two over, sitting alone like me. I don't know what it was exactly. Maybe the way his eyes followed me as I glanced at the menu. Maybe how he shifted in his chair just slightly whenever I moved. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that he was probably harmless, just being polite. But his attention didn't waver. It clung to me, like I was the only other person in the room worth noticing. When I ordered, he seemed to be listening. Too closely, I could feel him hanging on every word, and it made my skin crawl a little. I tried to focus on my food when it came, but I barely tasted it. My fork felt heavy in my hand, my stomach tight, and yet, I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to make a scene, or maybe I was too stubborn to admit I felt unsafe. But looking back, I wish I'd trusted that first wave of unease. It was there for a reason. I remember stepping out of that restaurant and feeling a rush of relief, like I'd finally shaken off the unease from dinner. The air was warm, the kind of night air that smells faintly of the sea and exhaust, and for a second I thought maybe I'd overthought it all. I walked at a steady pace, trying to focus on the rhythm of my footsteps, the glow of streetlights on the cobblestones. But not long after, I felt it again, that weight behind me, like I wasn't as alone as I wanted to be. I told myself not to look back, not to feed the anxiety, but eventually I couldn't help it. And when I did, I saw him. Sometimes across the street, leaning casually against a post or pausing to look at his phone, sometimes on the same side as me but a ways behind. Always just close enough that I couldn't ignore him, but far enough that I could keep making excuses. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe it was just coincidence. But the longer I walked, the less convincing those excuses felt. I tried taking turns I hadn't planned, crossing streets for no reason, slowing down then speeding up again, and every time when I glanced back, there he was. When I finally reached the block where the apartment was, my heart sank. I saw him at the far end of the street, standing still, facing the building, not moving, just watching. And that's when it hit me. I'd led him right to where I was staying. I didn't feel relief at getting home. I felt trapped. The next morning, I remember waking up with that tight feeling still sitting in my chest. But I told myself to shake it off. It was a new day, and maybe I just needed to get out, be around people, feel the city's energy. So I walked down to the market by the water. It was the kind of place that should have felt comforting. Full of chatter, smells of coffee and fresh bread, the clatter of crates being set out, sunlight glinting off rows of fruit and bottles of olive oil. For a little while it worked. I let myself believe I could melt into the crowd and leave the weirdness of last night behind. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He was standing near one of the vendor stalls, pretending to look through a rack of postcards, but his posture was all wrong, too still, too focused. I kept moving, weaving through people, but every time I glanced back, I could feel his eyes on me, even if he didn't lift his head. That false comfort I'd built up just cracked wide open. I stayed longer than I should have, pretending to browse, buying things I didn't need, trying to act normal like I wasn't itching to leave. I kept thinking if I acted casual, maybe I could take control of the situation somehow. But inside I was spiraling. That market, that crowd, it had felt safe for maybe 10 minutes. Now it felt like just another place where he could watch me, where I had no real escape. I wasn't even planning to go back so soon. I'd meant to stay out, keep moving, keep blending in with the city, but something about the weight of the morning had drained me. So I stopped for a coffee, lingered over it longer than I usually would, and finally made my way back toward the apartment. I remember the way the street felt quieter than before, the way the sun hit the side of the building, casting this sharp line of shadow right over the doorway. Everything looked normal at first, but when I got closer, I saw it. Just these faint little scratches around the lock. Nothing dramatic, the kind of thing that in another mood I might have missed entirely. But my eyes locked onto it, and I felt my breath hitch without meaning to. I froze, just staring at that door. my heart starting to race before my brain even caught up. I kept trying to tell myself maybe it had always been like that, or maybe I was seeing things because I was already so on edge. But I didn't believe it. Not really. I stood there too long, debating whether to even go inside. Part of me wanted to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to give myself one more hour of not knowing. But I couldn't. That tiny detail, those shallow, clumsy marks on the lock, felt louder than anything else around me. It was proof I couldn't keep brushing off. Proof that someone had tried to get in, and the worst part was knowing I'd brought this all right to my door. That night felt heavier than the ones before. I told myself going out would help, that the noise and music and people would drown out the anxiety that had been sitting in my chest all day. And for a while, maybe it did. But when it was over, when I stepped out onto that dim street, I felt everything catch up with me. The air felt cooler, almost damp, and the streetlights flickered just enough to make the shadows seem like they shifted when I wasn't looking. I stood there on the curb, phone in hand, watching for the cab I'd ordered. I tried not to look around, tried to convince myself that keeping my gaze steady on the road ahead would make me invisible somehow. But my eyes betrayed me, darting to the sides, scanning the dark, and that's when I saw him. Just beyond the reach of the nearest streetlight, standing near this crooked little tree at the edge of the lot. He wasn't moving. Just watching, like he had all the time in the world. The seconds felt stretched, like the cab was never going to come. I kept glancing down the road, willing those headlights to appear, every nerve in my body telling me to run, but with nowhere to run to. I felt exposed, like I'd stepped onto a stage without realizing it. Like every move I made was being clocked, measured. I kept swallowing down the panic, trying to look casual, like I wasn't terrified. But inside, I felt like I was waiting for something to snap. When the cab finally pulled up, I practically dove into it, heart still hammering, trying to tell myself that once I was back at the apartment, everything would feel normal again. I remember the ride back, how the city lights blurred past the window, how I kept glancing at my reflection in the glass, trying to read the worry in my own face. When I got out, the quiet hit me all over again. The street was still. The building stood there like nothing had happened, like it hadn't been part of this strange spiral I'd found myself in. And when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt this wave of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. I shut the door behind me, locked it, leaned back against it for a second just to catch my breath. The air was cool inside, too cool, and that's when I noticed it. The faint fluttering sound, like something moving when it shouldn't. I turned, and there it was. The kitchen window cracked open, the blinds shifting with the breeze. I knew I hadn't left it that way. The air in the room felt different, like it belonged to someone else now. For a second I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, like I was glued to the floor, like if I so much as blinked the wrong way, whatever was hiding would reveal itself. I don't know how long I stood there, listening, trying to convince myself I was wrong, but I wasn't. I couldn't stay. I had to get out, and every second I hesitated felt like an invitation for something worse. I don't even remember deciding where to hide. It's like my body just moved before my brain caught up. I ended up crouched behind these trash bins across the street, trying to stay small, trying not to make a sound. The night felt too quiet all of a sudden, no breeze, no voices, just the hum of distant traffic and my own breathing too loud in my ears. Every set of headlights that turned onto the street made my stomach clench. Every footstep, every car door shutting, I kept bracing for it to be him, to see him come out, to see his face again, to realize I hadn't gotten away. When the police finally pulled up, it felt like time snapped back into motion. I watched them approach the building, voices low, moving with this careful tension that made everything feel more real. I wanted to call out to them, but my voice wouldn't come. I just waited, heart pounding, every second stretching out longer than the last. And then they brought him out. The same man, his face calm in a way that made my skin crawl, like he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. Seeing him in handcuffs should have made me feel safe, like it was over, but it didn't. All I could think about was how close I'd been, how easily I could have walked into that room, into whatever he had planned. I still don't like thinking about it. That thin line between what happened and what almost did, and how I'll never really know which part of me saved me that night. There are parts of that winter I don't think about much. It's easier that way. Easier to focus on the cold air, the quiet streets, the smell of coffee on my gloves. But sometimes, out of nowhere, I'll remember that night. The night where everything seemed normal until it didn't. I didn't talk about it for a long time. Not because I was trying to hide it, but because even now it feels like I don't have the right words for how it all shifted. And the truth is, I don't think I saw it coming. Not really. I've thought about that night more times than I can count, and I still can't pin down what it was that first made my stomach tighten. Lenny's wasn't exactly the kind of place that drew a gentle crowd. We'd get all sorts at all hours. People coming off long shifts or just killing time. I'd learned to tune most of it out. But that group, I don't know. They weren't doing anything loud or dangerous. Just sitting there finishing their food, like every other tired group I'd served before. And still, something felt wrong. It was late, that stretch of the night where the world outside the diner starts to feel empty, like there's no one left but you and whoever's sitting at those tables. The air smelled like burnt coffee and old fryer oil, and I remember wiping down the counter while sneaking glances at them. They barely seemed to notice me, except for him, the one with the grin that didn't match his eyes. When he handed me the money, it wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it, like it was some kind of test to see how I'd react. I tried to let it roll off, kept telling myself it was nothing. I even smiled the way I was supposed to, counted the crumpled bills, focused on closing up. But it stayed with me, that look, that grin, that feeling that I'd just been pulled into something I didn't understand. Even as I wiped down the last table, even as I changed out of my uniform, I couldn't shake it. And now, I wonder if that was the moment I should have paid closer attention. It's strange, the way your mind tries to make things small so you can keep moving. I remember stepping out into the night, breathing in that sharp cold that always came after midnight in our town. The streets felt so still, like even the city was too tired to stay awake anymore. I crossed the lot near the old gas station, the one with the broken sign that buzzed faintly when the wind hit it right, and that's when I saw him. Just standing there at the edge of the lot, not doing anything, not even pretending to look at his phone or glance around like he was waiting for a ride. He was just there, like he belonged to the night, like he had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. And I felt that same weight in my chest I'd tried to shake off at Lenny's. The part of me that wanted to believe the best in people kept whispering that maybe it was coincidence, maybe he lived nearby, maybe he wasn't even looking at me. But I knew. The way he stood, the way he didn't look away, it was too intentional, too still. I should have turned around. I could have gone back inside, called someone, done anything other than what I did. But I didn't. I kept walking, like keeping my pace steady would somehow make it all less real. Like if I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it wouldn't follow me. But every step I took felt heavier, like I was pulling myself deeper into something I didn't know how to stop. At first, I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I was just being jumpy, that maybe the night was playing tricks on me. But the further I walked, the harder it got to believe that. I started turning down streets I didn't usually take, little side roads where the streetlights flickered, or the sidewalks cracked beneath my feet. I thought maybe if I changed my path, I'd lose him, or at least prove to myself that he wasn't really there, that this was all in my head. But every turn I made, every detour, it was the same. When I glanced back, he was always there. Not right behind me, but never far enough that I could convince myself it was nothing. Just this steady shape in the dark, matching my pace without rushing, without slowing. The sound of my own footsteps started to feel too loud, like they echoed off the buildings and gave me away. And the air, it felt thicker somehow, like it pressed against my chest and made it harder to breathe. I kept thinking, maybe he'd stop. Maybe he'd peel off down another street, or turn into a building, or just disappear. But he didn't. The streets that usually felt familiar felt different now, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Like they'd turned into corridors that only led deeper into this. I tried to stay calm, to keep walking like I always did, but every part of me was bracing, waiting for the moment it would all shift into something worse. I don't think I'll ever forget the way it felt. That moment when everything changed. 1 second, he was across the street, shadowed by the trees and the half-lit storefronts. The next, he was crossing over, his stride different now, like he wasn't trying to hide what he was doing anymore, like he didn't care if I saw. It was in the way his shoulders squared, the way his steps picked up, steady and sure. That was the second my stomach dropped, and any hope that this was just a misunderstanding evaporated. I'd felt nervous before, the kind of nervous that makes your hands tremble a little, or your heart beat faster. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that goes deeper, that cold, gripping kind that makes it hard to think, hard to breathe. I felt the space between us shrink, like every step he took stole a little more of it, and I could feel my own body start to tighten, like I was bracing for impact, like I knew I was running out of options. I didn't look back again after that. I didn't want to see how close he was getting, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how scared I was. I just kept my eyes forward, kept moving faster and faster, my mind racing to figure out where I could go, what I could do. The streets that had felt empty before felt even emptier now, like the whole world had folded in on itself, leaving just me and him. And I knew without a doubt that I couldn't stop. I don't even remember hearing his footsteps. Maybe they were there the whole time and I was too focused on moving forward. Or maybe he was just that quiet. But when his hand finally closed around my arm, it felt like my body froze from the inside out. That grip, it wasn't just firm, it was claiming, like he'd been waiting for this exact second. The kind of grip that told me no one else was around, that no one else was going to step in. The world felt too quiet in that moment, like even the night had pulled back to watch. When I turned, because I couldn't not turn, his face was right there, closer than I ever wanted it to be. The anger in his eyes was sharp enough to cut, but there was something else too, something colder, like satisfaction, like he'd won a game I didn't know I was playing. And I couldn't look away even though everything inside me was screaming to. My mind went blank except for the rush of terror flooding through me, so loud it drowned out everything else. I couldn't move at first. My body felt heavy, locked up, like it was trying to protect itself in the only way it knew how. And in that frozen second, all the choices I hadn't made played back in my head, the chances I had to run, to hide, to call for help, to do anything but this. And I felt so stupid for thinking I could stay ahead of him, for thinking I could outwalk what was always going to catch up. It didn't feel like something I decided to do. It was like my body had been holding back so much fear that it had nowhere left to go but out. 1 second, I was frozen, staring at him, feeling his grip like a chain around my arm. The next, I felt my hands move, not with any plan, not with any thought, just this burst of something raw and desperate. I remember the way my fingers found his face, the way my nails scraped across his skin, the resistance of it, the heat of it, the sound that tore out of him, this awful mix of shock and fury that I can still hear sometimes when it's too quiet. It all blurred for a second, him stumbling back, his hand loosening, my own breath coming out in ragged gasps. I didn't even realize I was holding. I didn't wait. I didn't think about what else he might do, or if he'd come after me again. I just ran. My legs felt like they weren't even mine anymore, like I'd handed them over to something primal that only cared about getting me away. The night felt endless as I moved, like the street kept stretching ahead of me no matter how fast I went. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I could feel the burn in my chest, the weight of every step, but I didn't stop, not until the building came into view, not until my hands fumbled for my keys. And even then, part of me kept waiting for him to appear again, closer than before. The second the door clicked shut behind me, it was like every bit of strength I had left drained out all at once. My legs just gave out, like they couldn't hold me anymore, and I sank down right there in the entryway, my back against the door. The wood felt cold through my jacket. I could hear my breath, shaky, uneven, loud in a way that didn't feel like it belonged to me. It filled the space around me, this ragged sound that made it clear how close I'd come to losing control, or maybe worse. I remember the blur of voices, my roommates coming down the stairs, calling out, asking what happened, if I was okay. But it was like they were underwater, like the world had folded in on itself and left me alone inside this bubble of what just happened. I couldn't find the words. I didn't even try at first. My heart was still racing, my hands still trembling so badly I had to press them against my knees to steady them. All I could think about was how close it had come, how easily it could have ended differently. I kept seeing his face when I closed my eyes, kept feeling the weight of his hand on my arm, the heat of his breath too close to mine. And the more I sat there, the more I realized I didn't know how to stop thinking about it. Even now I don't. Even now I'm still trying to figure out how to breathe through the memory of it.